Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp reviews about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. Today, our guest is Wendy Cutler, a leading expert on U.S. trade policies in Washington, D.C. She's with Asia Society Policy Institute and a former acting deputy U.S. trade representative. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
With so many announcements coming from President Trump, we need you to help us understand what's really going on from Canada, Mexico to China.
Well, it's a very fluid situation. Things seem to change day to day. A number of tariff threats have been issued, and a number of tariffs actually have been imposed. In terms of threats issued, those include a wide array of countries, including Colombia, Mexico, Canada, China, and threats with respect to Europe and others. But in terms of tariffs that have actually been put into place, China has been a target with 20% additional tariffs imposed last month. And Canada and Mexico have also seen tariff increases with respect to imports of products that do not fall under the USMCA jurisdiction. And steel and aluminum tariffs were imposed globally. So maybe I forgot something, but that seems to be the landscape now. Now everyone's looking towards not only sectoral tariffs, but also reciprocal tariffs.
April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that.
And explain what is reciprocal tariffs.
So the idea behind reciprocal tariffs is if you charge us 10%, we're going to charge you 10%. And so the idea is to kind of level it out and treat each other the same way with respect to tariffs. But it's easier said than done. And so I think the president's team now, based on reporting, is looking for an easier way to implement this reciprocal tariff approach.
Let's get back a little bit. Help us understand, why does President Trump like tariffs so much? He said it's the most beautiful word.
Right.
Why?
So I think part of it is tariffs are easy to understand. It's one number, and you understand if you have a 10% tariff like the EU does on autos, we have a 2.5% tariff on autos. It's unfair, it's uneven. When you start talking about non-tariff measures, it gets so complicated and it's very hard to explain how licensing restrictions or standards could be discriminating against U.S. products. But I think he also sees tariffs as an incredible tool to achieve a multiple of objectives, including getting rid of unfair trade practices, rebalancing trade deficits with countries, providing an incentive to bring investment back to the United States. He sees it as negotiating leverage, and also he sees it as a means to raise revenues, and particularly at a time when he's looking at a big tax cut, finding revenue in the United States to offset that tax cut becomes important.
In addition to tariffs, as you mentioned, right, it's easy for people to understand, but clearly the U.S. has many other tools, and the U.S. has been using other tools over the years, from the currency or export control restrictions and licensing, as you mentioned, and many other trade-related policies. Some people may say the U.S. is increasingly using those tools to maintain its U.S. leadership, perhaps, or other goals. What are your thoughts about this? Some people would even say the U.S. is weaponizing those tools.
Well, look, Trump is clearly using tariffs to achieve non-trade objectives. So his first tariff threat, which shocked everyone, was against Colombia.
Yeah.
And that had to do with migration and using, which planes they were using to move the migrants that were leaving the United States.
Pero lo que sí critico es que no puede llegar ningún migrante a una cárcel de esas, porque sería tratado como criminal y como esclavo. Y no lo es un ser humano. Y América Latina no puede bajar la bandera de la dignidad humana.
There been any previous U.S. president that's used these tariffs to achieve such political?
I can't recall in recent years. During Trump 1.0, he did threaten Mexico on migration, but never went through with those tariffs. This time around, though, he does seem, much more willing, with respect to Canada and Mexico. Frankly, the tariffs he's threatening now and as imposed are really due, according to him, to their lax drug interdiction policies as well as migration concerns.
Yeah, as I mentioned, right, the U.S. has many other tools it can use, and in the past we see the U.S. mostly using them, for example, sanctions on adversaries. I would say, Cuba, North Korea, we hear about those practices in the past. But this time around, again, he's actually using those tools against our allies.
We are fighting unjustified U.S. tariffs, including those on steel and autos with counter tariffs of our own. And those are designed to cause maximum pain in the United States, but have only a minimal impact here in Canada. We are protecting our workers and businesses because we're using every dollar that we collect from those retaliatory tariffs, and we use it to protect our workers.
Do you think he was doing that really for a domestic audience, or what was he trying to accomplish?
It's hard to get into his head, and I don't want to say I understand.
Nobody really.
But let's just say, let's be honest, migration is a key concern of his, and so I think that's one of the first issues he wanted to go after. And since, in his mind, tariffs are this incredible tool, why not marry tariffs and migration? Other presidents or other White Houses may have looked at other tools, like you mentioned, looking at other types of sanctions or other type of measures that were much more tied to migration concerns.
You have been a trade official for decades for the United States, and I think the U.S. trade policies have evolved over the years. Again, give us maybe a quick rundown on how the U.S. conducted its trade policies over the last, from the globalization era to now.
Yeah, so look, post-World War II, up until probably 10, 20 years ago, it was all about trade liberalization, and the U.S. was looking to open markets, even if that meant we opened our market to get other countries to open their market. And that was the reason why we pursued so many trade agreements. It was the reason why we were leaders in the World Trade Organization. But in recent years, there has been growing concern all around the United States, and I think valid concerns that maybe this trade agenda hasn't really worked for us.
Was it more trade or globalization? What do you think?
I think it's a combination of both. I don't think if you ask the average American, they could even tell you what the difference is between international trade and globalization. But just a feeling that kind of what Trump is saying, that, we're not benefiting from all of this. Other countries are benefiting more. And it's kind of inevitable if you think back on our trade policy, because when we put it into effect, this trade liberalization policy, we were number one. We were making everything. We were the market of choice. We were dominant. And over time, other countries developed and became much more global major actors on the global trading scene, particularly China. And that just has changed the whole calculus, frankly.
So the changing dynamics and also who commands more trading powers basically is probably one of the underlying factors.
Yeah, one of them. Again, like, we weren't concerned about what other countries were doing because we were so in the lead. And we felt it was in our interest if other countries' economies were lifted up, and that would lead to more peace and prosperity around the world.
Yeah. With those changes in the United States right now, and you speak to a lot of foreign officials, you just came back from a foreign trip as well, what are their current concerns?
Well, there's a lot. They're sharing a lot of concerns with me. I think they're very concerned about, number one, uncertainty. they have no idea what's going on in Washington. And when they try and talk to people like me or other people to explain what's going on, they feel a little better, but they're not comforted by our responses that we don't know where this is all going to end up. So uncertainty. Two, I think a real concern that the U.S. is turning inward now. And that we're not going to be global leaders, leading on trade and other global health and other issues, and that creates a vacuum and puts more pressure on them, frankly, to step up. I think they're also very concerned that we have lost interest in international organizations and international groupings, including the World Trade Organization, but frankly, also the G20 and other groupings that for years have served us pretty well, and areas where we've kind of been driving the agenda in many of these organizations. And I think there's just also a concern about Trump personally, in that they're trying to figure out how they should deal with him. They're told on one hand, flatter him, announce more foreign direct investment like Taiwan has done. TSMC just announced another $100 billion worth of investment. Buy more from the United States, whether it be LNG or agriculture, versus get tough and retaliate and show the president that, we're not going to accept this. We have a domestic constituency too, and we need to stand up for, our own people. And so I think a lot of them are grappling with how should they respond? And frankly, for the countries that have decided to retaliate, they've been shocked by Trump's immediate reaction of, you better lift those tariffs or we're going to even impose more tariffs. Right. So a fear of escalation and no certainty on how to kind of reduce those strains and tensions.
Yeah, it seems like rationality doesn't work.
It's not as valuable as it used to be.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee, we make the news. Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.
And you just mentioned, some countries are willing to stand up. Let's talk about China.
美方再次以芬太尼问题为借口，威胁对中国输美产品加征关税，中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对，将采取一切必要措施，坚定维护自身的正当利益。
I think President Xi is a very smart guy, and I think we'll end up making a very good deal for both. But, we've been treated so badly for so many years. Again, we allowed that to happen.
What do you think his real strategy, or if there's any strategy towards China, what does he want to accomplish with China this time around?
Look, I think there's part of the president that would really like to do another big trade deal with China. Call it the Phase 2 trade agreement or call it something else. I think he's very intrigued with that. And so while he's putting tariffs in place, China has been very measured in its response. It's sending signals that it has a lot of tools and it's prepared, but it has been reluctant to even, in my view, even proportionally respond. It's been pretty measured. And I think China is trying to wait and see what is the president's objectives here. And, can we negotiate with him, or are we just going to continue to be hit with tariffs, in which case each time we're going to have to punch back harder. So I think Beijing's trying to figure out where Trump stands here. I also think there is kind of an inconsistency between, on the one hand, Trump saying, I'd love to go to China in the first 100 days. Xi Jinping and I are very close, and maybe we can negotiate a deal. At the same time, again, not only have we put in these 20% tariffs, we've also revoked China's ability to use what's called this de minimis exception, allowing small packages to be shipped duty-free. that still has to be implemented, but it's been announced. He just announced new inbound and outbound investment restrictions through an executive order. And there's this shipbuilding Section 301 where we're going to be taking pretty strong action very soon if he follows the advice of USTR. So conflicting messages, and I think over time we'll have a better sense of what his ultimate objective is.
Well, as you mentioned, there's been a rumor around Xi Jinping and President Trump's summit, either taking place in Washington, D.C. or in Beijing.
Or Mar-a-Lago.
Right. Or some say April, some say June. Who knows? There's just so many rumors these days. But it seems that if they were to meet, some kind of consensus or agreements need to be in place. Otherwise, there's no point for the two leaders to meet, right?
Well, I think they could meet to kind of launch new negotiations, right? If they're going to meet in the next few months, there's no way they're going to reach a big trade deal.
Okay, so you don't think they could reach any trade deal?
I think they can announce some measures and announce the launch of a negotiation and maybe with some parameters, but no, I don't think they could actually negotiate a deal. But I think China, before it agrees to any summit with the president, it's going to be very cautious and want assurances that there'll be no surprises, and that it will go in a way that will not embarrass or humiliate China.
Yeah.
And so I think the president's much more impulsive. Oh, just come down to Mar-a-Lago, let's have a summit. I think China's going to be very deliberate and very cautious and will only participate again if they are convinced that it's going to be a productive summit that's going to get this relationship back on track.
Yeah. Well, for Taiwan, obviously it's watching everything between U.S. and China closely. They're very concerned that Trump will put Taiwan on the negotiation table. And then second, on semiconductor tariffs that Trump has announced, not with details, he just said he was going to...
It's part of his sectoral announcement. He's announced semiconductors as one of a handful of sectors that he's focused on. But the trick there is going to be that semiconductors, most are imported embedded into products.
Right.
So how exactly...
The cell phones, the laptops, and...
Exactly. So how do you do that? If it's just the actual semiconductor, that's one thing. But if he announces tariffs on, semiconductor components, and every company that's importing a product would then have to kind of declare not only the product and the tariff, but also the percentage that the semiconductor could,
Yeah, how do you really count that?
How do you do that? So it's going to be pretty complex. Also, it's very unclear to me what legal authority he would use to just impose tariffs on semiconductors on April 2nd. I think
Which
it's more
probably
likely,
doesn't matter.
Well, I think it's more likely he would initiate like a trade investigation into semiconductors, whether under Section 232, which would be a national security type investigation, or under Section 301 and name certain countries.
But again, what is the end goal for that?
I think the end goal for Trump is to bring all this manufacturing home and again, to kind of even out our trade relations, but very much using tariffs as an incentive for reshoring versus Biden, who used really subsidies to really...
Incentives.
As the incentive to bring manufacturing back to the United States, including from economies like Taiwan.
Very happy to announce we are going to invest additional 100 billion US dollar in addition to our current 65 billion US dollars investment in Arizona. For this, all the investment, 165 billion, is going to create thousands of high-paid jobs, as the president just announced.
As you can probably imagine, Taiwan is very concerned and very worried, even with TSMC's $100 billion investment announcement. There's a concern about hollowing out Taiwan's entire industry. Should Taiwan be worried?
I'll leave that up to my friends in Taiwan. But I think that, yes, they're definitely, the pressure's on them, and not just on them, on other countries too, to invest more in the United States. And all these economies are going to have to balance out like what remains in their country, what they can actually build in the United States. And to be honest, the FDI in the United States, it's important for companies like TSMC and others. This is where the market is.
Yeah.
This gets them into our supply chains more squarely and more directly and from a more durable perspective. So it's not all, win-lose.
So there's benefit to it.
Yeah.
Clearly. Yeah. All these uncertainties you've repeatedly said as almost like a characteristic of this administration's economic policy. Do you think that's affecting U.S. economy now? We're seeing some signs of weakening. Are you worried?
Yeah, I'm worried. And even though the Treasury Secretary just told the American people,
Not
don't
to
worry. We all, any economist can tell you tariffs have costs.
Yeah.
They're going to contribute to inflation. We've already seen just the threats of all these tariffs and all the uncertainty, trigger a sell-off in the stock market. And also what I'm hearing from businesses now when I speak to them and brief them about these tariffs is that they are holding back now on investments because there's so much uncertainty.
Sure.
They don't know even domestic investments, but but also investments in Canada, Mexico, and elsewhere until they have a better sense of what the landscape's going to look like. And so once companies put off those investment decisions, that also contributes to a slowing economy,
Right.
along with inflation and stock market reduction. So yeah, I am worried, and I think anyone who works on these issues in other countries and in the United States should be worried.
If the U.S. economy is not doing well, obviously it will affect the world. With this possibility, as well as all these other uncertainties, what would be your advice to Taiwan right now?
Well, my first advice for most economies is to lay low, that if you're not in Trump's line of fire right now, be happy and don't ask to be in the limelight. But unfortunately, look, Taiwan does have a pretty high average tariff rate, a much higher in agriculture, which definitely drives up the manufacturing overall average. It's, I believe, our 6th largest trade deficit.
Yes.
The president has also said that he will adjust those tariff rates based on whether the partner is being cooperative or being, combative. So at that point, Taiwan should, well, right now Taiwan should be thinking of different options. But if they are in this first tranche of countries that are hit on the reciprocal tariff basis, I think they should find ways to engage with the administration and see how they can address non-tariff measure concerns, currency concerns, as well as tariff rates. And through the years, we made a lot of progress with Taiwan, getting rid of a lot of non-tariff measures. So I think they have a pretty good story to tell there, and way few non-tariff measures than when I used to negotiate with Taiwan.
谈判关税可以从比照美加墨自贸协定，从台美双方零关税开始谈起。2、扩大对美采购以降低贸易逆差。行政院已经完成盘点，对农工、石油、天然气等产品的大量采购计划。国防部也已经提出军事采购清单，各项采购都会积极进行。
Is there any hope for a bilateral trade agreement?
I would be quite surprised. I think, while Trump has indicated that he may be interested in pursuing some, new trade agreements, either sectoral ones or bilateral ones, I have not seen Taiwan on the list. I'm not saying it's impossible, but other countries are higher on the list, including, I've heard him mention, or his team mentioned, the UK and Kenya, and of course in updating the USMCA.
Yeah. Well, help us imagine what the world will look like 4 years from now.
Look, I think for me, I need to be an optimist. So I am hoping that over time, a lot of these tariff threats and a lot of this uncertainty will kind of go away as more and more of his sub-cabinets announced, and you have more folks in the administration that are able to negotiate with countries and able to not only carry out the president's agenda, but also be able to have candid conversations with the president that this policy is not serving not only not serving U.S. interests, but working against his objectives.
Yeah. Well, with that, thank you so much, Wendy, for always being so helpful in explaining to the world what the U.S. trade policies are really about, especially during Trump 2.0. Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media for our latest episode. See you next time.
For more stories from Taiwan, around the world, and Washington, D.C., please download the TaiwanPlus app and follow us on social media.
经历过人生的话，你发现说，我们大部分都是爱美。
我自己少遇见一朵花，我可能就不是这个样子。
开始思考什么叫做一个本土性。
大声的唱出来说我是台湾人。